Welcome back. So in this first part of the programme, I wanted to talk a bit today about the effects of sleep loss, but not dwell on that because I think that you wouldn't be here if you didn't know what it felt like not to sleep well. So we're going to talk a little bit about the effects of sleep loss, and then I want to talk about sleep, how it works, what causes insomnia, how insomnia develops, and then a little bit around sleep hygiene at the end. Again, we'll talk more about why we're not going to spend lots of time on sleep hygiene, but we will cover it a little bit in this first part of the process. So, excuse me looking down, I've got some notes here and I want to make sure I don't forget anything, so that's why I keep looking away. So, I think we all know that when we have a bad night's sleep, we pretty quickly feel the effects of it. So, short-term tiredness, feeling a bit grumpy, lacking energy, lacking in motivation, those kind of issues. Longer term, it can start to have a real impact on our physical health. We might find we get more coughs and colds. There are links to sort of an increase in things like obesity and heart disease, those kind of issues. And from a mental health perspective, there's a very strong link between poor sleep and mental health problems. So you can imagine that if you're a long-term poor sleep, it's very difficult to feel upbeat and kind of happy and jolly when actually you're not getting enough sleep. So you can see how not sleeping makes people very anxious, and that mental health link becomes pretty strong. So if you are struggling with your sleep, you're not alone. 1 in 3 people will suffer from an insomnia problem in their lifetime. And at any one time, it's around 1 in 10. So most of us have been there. We all know what it's like. Even if you just have a week of bad sleep or a month of bad sleep, we all know how stressful it can become and how kind of all-consuming it can become. So sleep is a big deal. Everybody knows about sleep. Everybody wants to talk about sleep, and everybody's interested in it. So we always want to know if we could get better sleep, how much better would we feel? So it's a topic that interests a lot of people, and because of that, there's a lot of information out there. So what I want to try and do with this program is lay out for you the information and the techniques that will improve your sleep and help you to stop trying the things that won't, by giving you a good understanding and a good rationale of what will work and why it will work. Because it's a lot of there's a lot of things out there that in ways attack certain parts, I suppose, of not sleeping, but in terms of a whole program, it is the cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia program that we're offering, which will help. So cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia, CBT-I for short, is the recommended NHS program for poor sleepers. If you were to ask your GP, they would be able to tell you that it is the recommended program. The reason you probably haven't been referred for any treatment is because there's very few people trained up in it, and there's very little access to clinics and practitioners. So it has a huge evidence base. There's been research for the last 20 years around CBT for insomnia, and a lot of those research studies show that around 70 to 80% of people see an improvement in their sleep, and that can often be short term, so in around 4 weeks. So it's a very effective program. It's very different from medication. It's not looking at a short term cure. It's looking at actually for a long term cure, where actually for the rest of your life you will understand how to manage your sleep better. So it is a very effective program. Access is the difficulty, and that's the reason for this program, is I'm trying to find a way to deliver that to you without having to have a one-to-one session. So CBT for insomnia works to help your sleep by using sort of 2 approaches. We're looking at what is maintaining the problem, so why are you sleeping poorly and why is it still going on? And then we're looking at the behaviours that are maintaining the sleep problem, and also the thoughts that are maintaining the problem. So there is the kind of the beauty, I guess, of CBT-I is that a practitioner in CBT for insomnia is trained in how to fix sleep, but they are also trained in the anxieties and the stresses that come along with having a sleep problem. So we are able to kind of work with the person as a whole, rather than just leaving them with a stress that isn't dealt with, which may be still affecting their sleep longer term. Whilst you're doing this sleep program, if you are taking medication, so if you're taking any kind of zopiclone or any kind of antidepressants, just because of the sleep, I want you to stay in touch with your GP and only wean off with their advice. If you are taking a proper sleeping tablet, and purely just to help you sleep, then what I would love for you to do is, if you can, rather than taking one on one night, have a couple of nights off and then take another one, what I would rather you did is take the minimum dose that you can bear, and take it every night. So what I'm trying to do is get some routine and structure into how you take them. So many people are taking them as a reaction. So I haven't slept well and now I'm going to take a pill. From a psychological point of view, it helps you to go off to sleep, and that's how people are using them. But the problem is that is making the problem worse. So we'll talk about that much more later and about how to wean off medication. But for now, if you could take the lowest dose possible, but take it very regularly, so take it every night, and that way we kind of have this level playing field, and we will start to look at weaning off that later on. But to start with, every night, the smaller dose. The reason we suggest that is because if you take it one night and then don't take it for a few nights and then you take it another night, we end up with something called rebound insomnia, which is where the night after you haven't taken the sleeping tablet, you tend to sleep even worse than you would have done. 2 nights like that, and actually a person usually gives in and takes another sleeping tablet. And that's how this psychological dependency kind of occurs. So people sleep much worse after a night of having a sleeping tablet. And then they end up usually panicking more and taking more of them. And over time, you end up having to take more and more and a higher dosage in order to get the same effect. So we're trying to keep away from the medication as being the solution here. So the first thing I want to talk to you a little bit about is sleep. So I'm not going to spend a massive amount of time talking about sleep in general because firstly, I'm not a sleep scientist. So my background is not as a sleep researcher. I don't know lots of in-depth knowledge around hormones and chemicals involved in sleep, because in order to help someone sleep better, I don't need to do all of those things. My specialism is absolutely insomnia and treating insomnia. So I want to spend some time talking about sleep, but it is important to me that actually we don't dwell too much on sleep. I know that sounds mad because we're doing a sleep program, but I don't want to spend lots of time dissecting sleep because we actually can't manage it to that level anyhow. So all it does is create a little bit more anxiety and stress if we look at all these different parts of it in too much detail. But there are different stages of sleep. So the first stage of sleep is that light sleep. So you're starting to nod off. You can still be pretty aware of what's going on around. You don't really know if you're asleep or not. You're just starting to go into sleep. That's usually the stage where something called the hypnic jerk would happen, which is that sensation that you've fallen off something. So you suddenly wake up with a start and sometimes can find it hard to get back to sleep again. That's very normal. It's just that your body is starting to shut down to go to sleep, and maybe you're sleep deprived and it shuts down a little bit too quickly, because we do tend to see the hypnic jerk is more apparent in people who are sleep deprived. Your body is shutting down, shuts down a little bit too quickly, your blood pressure drops a little bit too quickly, and your body reacts by a shot of adrenaline just to wake you back up again. So that's why you get that sensation of falling. So it's very normal, and it will get better if you carry on with this program and you improve your sleep. You'll get that less. So stage 2, still a deep sleep, still a light sleep, but it's getting a little bit deeper. Heart rate is slowing down, your breathing's slowing down. And then we go into stage 3 and 4. Deep sleep is stage 3 and stage 4. And that's deep quality, sort of regenerative sleep that we need. Those are the sleep stages that often people with insomnia are lacking in. They're the ones that would help you to feel more refreshed. They are where you're regenerating, where you're recovering from any kind of illnesses, where hormones are being released. So lots of different functions going on in deep sleep, which is why it's so important. And then the final stage of sleep is REM sleep. So that's that dream sleep that we are aware of. So characterised by your eyeballs sort of moving behind your eyelids, lots of brain activity going on in that time. The functions of REM sleep is not entirely clear, but we do believe that it plays a role in memory consolidation. Lots of different theories around dreams and what they mean and whether or not they're telling the future, all these kind of things. But the truth is we don't know exactly the functions of each of the stages of sleep. But the biggest evidence would say that this is about regenerating, repairing, getting ready for the next day, kind of if you imagine it's a bit like a pyramid, we're the things that are the most important things are looking after our brain and our major organs, and then we go down this pyramid, and maybe at the bottom somewhere there, if we can get enough sleep, is making your eyes look nice and white and your skin look great the next day. So in order to get that good quality sleep and get all the benefits, we need to be getting regular cycles of all of those stages each night, and that's what I'm going to be helping you to get with this program. So there are 4 main things which control how we sleep. The first thing that controls how we sleep is our sleep drive. So if you imagine an appetite, that's what our sleep drive is. That when we wake up in the morning, we start building up this appetite for sleep. The longer that we're awake for, the bigger our appetite becomes for sleep. So that when we get into bed at night time, we fall asleep quickly, take back all of that sleep in one go, and then we wake up the next morning and we start the whole process again. So without that drive, it's very difficult to sleep well and to fall asleep, because essentially there isn't enough appetite there for it. We don't need it enough, so we don't do it properly. If you imagine that you have a nap in the afternoon, then the effect that would have on that drive is like having a snack. So actually you're having some of the sleep before you go to bed, and then when you get into bed, there's not enough left, and we find it hard to fall asleep, or we have a very light sleep, or we wake up in the middle of the night. So sleep is the higher the drive that we have to sleep, the better the sleep becomes. So that drive is really important. Now the drive works in conjunction with our body clock. So you'll have all heard of our body clock, and we have this internal clock which is called a circadian rhythm. Now the circadian rhythm is controlling not just sleep, but it's controlling when our appetite, when we're thirsty, when we use the toilet, our energy levels. All those things are controlled in that 24-hour rhythm. And in order to sleep well, we need to be sleeping in the correct part of that clock. So we need to train our body clock to understand when it is that we want to sleep. So babies are born, we are born with the ability to fall asleep. It's a very natural thing, and everybody can fall asleep, but we don't necessarily know when and for how long. And that's what our circadian rhythm and our body clock is helping us. Largely controlled by light and dark. So generally we're sleeping at nighttime, and we're awake during the daytime hours. But in order to sleep well, that clock has to be set to fall asleep at the same sort of time that our drive is nice and high. And our body needs to understand, how long do we want to fall asleep for? What do we want to do in that time? So that clock needs to be set correctly, as well as the drive. And the reason we know those two need to work together is, if I give you an example of, let's say that I miss an entire night's sleep tonight. So my drive to sleep tomorrow morning is going to be really, really high. My body's going to be desperate for sleep. My appetite is going to be huge. But if I was to get into bed at 9 a.m, I would probably only sleep for a couple of hours, maybe 3 hours. And that's because although my drive to sleep is really high, actually my body clock doesn't sleep at that time in the day. So it doesn't really know what's going on. It'll take back enough to help me recover enough to get through the day. And I'll probably feel pretty ropey off that, and I wouldn't be feeling very refreshed. But my body clock wouldn't just say, okay, we'll just take the 8 hours now then, we'll just switch it around and do it here instead. So we have to train our body clock, and it has to know what's coming next. The third thing that controls how well we sleep is the connection that we have with our beds. So it sounds obvious, but if you don't really connect your bed to sleeping well, then you won't sleep very well. So if you get to bed every night and it's like a battleground, you're tossing and turning all night, you're very anxious, you're worried, you're frustrated, you're checking your phones, or we're watching TV because there's nothing else to do because we're wide awake. All those things create a very weak link between bed and sleeping. So in order to sleep well, that connection has to be there, that when I go to bed tonight, I expect that I'm going to sleep well. When I get into bed, all the cues are there to tell me that I'm going to go to sleep, and then I will. And the fourth thing that's important to know about sleep is that, as I say, it is an automatic process. We are born with the ability to sleep. We just aren't necessarily born with the ability to know when and how. So the more we think about it, the more involved we get in trying to do it, the worse it becomes, because it's an automatic process. Same as breathing. We're born with the ability to breathe. If you think a lot about it and you try and change it, it feels uncomfortable and it's not very easy to do anymore. Exactly the same with sleep. The more we try to do it, the harder we try and control it, the worse it becomes. So we're going to be talking a lot about actually how to do less to try and sleep rather than trying to do more. So what I wanted to, sort of the final part of this video is around how do we actually develop insomnia. So the model of insomnia that I want to talk about is something called the 3 Ps model. So in the 3 Ps model, if you are a relatively normal sleeper, but for whatever reason you go to bed one night and there is a precipitating event, so a trigger. So let's say that there's loads of noise outside, or I'm stressed because I've got to do a presentation at work tomorrow, or it can be something huge like a bereavement or a divorce, something enormous. Whatever reason, I go to bed and I don't sleep well. If the next night I still don't sleep well, third night I don't sleep well, very quickly I would be worried about the fact I'm not sleeping. I would look worse, I would feel worse, I'd be grouchy, a bit more irritable, and I'm wondering, why can I not just sleep? Why am I so stressed? Why can't I do it? So very quickly we become intolerant of not sleeping. So the first thing that I would do is go to bed earlier. If I felt like I hadn't had enough sleep on the previous 3 nights, I would go to bed earlier, because what I would be doing is increasing my opportunity to sleep. So I'm opening up the window to try and get myself some more sleep. But if we go back to those things we need in order to sleep well, immediately by going to bed earlier, I'm starting to interfere in the natural process. So suddenly I'm going to bed earlier, maybe my drive isn't high enough, or I'm going to bed earlier and my body clock is saying, I don't know why we're in bed at 9:30. We never go to bed at 9:30. Suddenly I'm tossing and turning till 11 and I didn't fall asleep any faster. So just by going to bed early, we're starting to change things. If going to bed early doesn't work and I still feel tired, then I would probably try other things. So I would Google it. I would perhaps put some lavender spray on my pillow. I would give up caffeine, or I'd drink more caffeine during the day. What I would certainly do is be worrying about it. If it had gone on for a week or 2 weeks, I'd be worried. So I would be asking other people, and I would be starting to go, if I can't sleep, this is what's going to happen. What if I can't ever sleep well again? So we start to think a lot more about sleep, and we start to focus on it a lot more, whereas when we're a good sleeper, we don't think about it much at all. So I would continue to start making these changes, and these changes are called the perpetuating factors. So these are all the things that I'm starting to do differently, which are actually becoming part of the problem. So you can imagine this list. You'll have tried lots of them yourself. So it's giving things up, taking things on, not going out at night in case you get too worked up and can't go to sleep, looking on your phone late at night, spending lots and lots of time in bed even though you're awake, long relaxation exercises, mindfulness in bed, listening to hypno CDs, listening to sleep CDs, listening to things on your computer, loads and loads of things. And actually what ends up happening is we're trying so hard to sleep well that it becomes impossible to do. By the time I've gone through that checklist of all these different things that I've tried, one night they'll work, the next night they don't. The pressure becomes bigger and bigger to sleep well. And what we know is that the more we try, the worse it becomes. So all of those factors, although we do them for a good reason and they make sense at the time, they actually become part of the problem. So in the end, the trigger for the insomnia and the poor sleep becomes irrelevant. It doesn't matter why it started. What's maintaining it is a lot of worry and a lot of changed behaviours. And essentially what we end up with is drive that is not strong enough to sleep well at the right times, and a body clock which has lost the ability to just fall asleep and stay asleep. So your body clock ends up waking up at different times, being awake for large periods and thinking that's normal. And that connection with our bed becomes very weak. So we get into bed, having done all these different things, thinking about sleep, hoping it's going to work, and then inevitably it doesn't. And we start connecting our bed to not sleeping. So we end up with something called conditioned insomnia, where essentially we unlearn how to sleep. We condition ourselves not to sleep very well anymore. And so what we're looking at this program of treatment is relearning, so wiping that slate clean and relearning how to sleep well again. So that leads me into a bit about sleep hygiene. So sleep hygiene is a difficult one because for many of you, if you've been to the GP, the first thing you'll be offered is a sheet on sleep hygiene. So that's telling you to cut down on your caffeine, don't drink alcohol too late, don't eat a big meal before bed, don't exercise too close to bed, get some blackout blinds, make sure your bedroom's comfortable, those kind of things. And although all of those things are to a certain extent useful, they are just things to be aware of, and they're useful for a good sleeper who maybe wants to improve their sleep or, you know, not send it off down the wrong path. The reality is they are not cures for a sleep problem. And that list of things that I just described that maintains the problem, many of those are sleep hygiene. So what we end up with is somebody who doesn't sleep very well, who obeys the most strict sleep hygiene and continues to sleep poorly. And that's because they're thinking too much about it. They're doing too many things to try and make it work. Ask a good sleeper about their sleep hygiene and they wouldn't have a clue. If they wanted to have a drink, they'd have one. If they had a cup of coffee at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they would do it. They haven't had a new mattress in years. They probably don't have effective blackout blinds. They certainly don't use eye masks or earplugs. They're only drinking chamomile tea before bed if they enjoy it, not because they think it's going to help them to fall asleep. So those sleep hygiene things are really important, that we start to see that the role that they're playing is actually a negative one in fixing the sleep. So I know that might be quite tricky to hear really, because you've probably spent a long time obeying those really seriously, but I am going to talk you through how to pay attention to them but not allow them to become that much of an issue. So the final thing to go away and start doing is your sleep diary. So hopefully you've now got a good understanding of a little bit around how we sleep and a good understanding of how you've developed an insomnia problem here. So why has it gone wrong? Why are you not able to sleep well? So if you look at the first booklet that you've got there, there is a sleep diary at the end. Now the sleep diary is a measure of how many hours of sleep you're getting and how many hours you're in bed. So it's a very approximate tool. I don't want you to try and be exact. I certainly don't want you to clock watch to measure it. So all I'm looking for is at what time are you getting into bed, about how long do you think you're awake overnight, and what time are you getting out of bed the next morning. So just an approximate. Please don't start looking at the clock all through the night to tell me, just guess, to record it, just guess an estimate. And what I really don't want you to do during this is any kind of sleep tracking. So the sleep diary is the only measure that we're going to be using for the tracking of your sleep. So if you wear a Fitbit or a watch, or you have your phone under your pillow and it's using some kind of app, I want you to give up all of those. Again, part of those maintaining factors become tracking. The people who don't sleep well obsessively track their sleep and try and work out what's going on with it. Inevitably, it makes them sleep even worse. So trackers are, for me, of no use. They're not always accurate. They're very much based on movement. So if you're a terrible sleeper but you lie still all night, it would look as though you're in a deep sleep. Vice versa, if you sleep well but you toss and turn a lot, it might look like you had a disrupted sleep. So they're not necessarily very accurate. And for me, there's no point knowing all this detail about your sleep. What we're looking at is how we're going to fix it. Let's not obsessively monitor how bad it is now. All it's going to do is create more anxiety. So no tracking at all. I want you to take off the watches and the Fitbits and everything else and get rid of them for now. So hopefully that's been useful. So for the next 7 days, what I would like you to do is go away, fill in your sleep diary, and then when you come back, we are going to move on to the second part, which is around starting to control your sleep and make some changes to it, and hopefully start looking at ways to improve it. So I hope that's been useful. If you are having email support, then do feel free to drop me an email and let me know how things are going on and any questions that you may have at this point. Otherwise, good luck with that, and I will see you at the next session. Thank you.